So welcome everybody. This is the first of the Playwork Foundation's online kind of courses. So we're kind of starting with a very introductory session into play. So we can, from each of these sessions, we will build. So I'm Karen Benjamin. My background is as a Playwork trainer, writing training courses for Playwork partnerships, delivering lots of training and managing an adventure playground for disabled children up in Glasgow, as well as working for an inclusive play setting in Birmingham, where I am currently.
Thank you, Karen. And my name's Helen Stephenson. So I'm one of the Playwork Foundation trustees and have been on the board of trustees for about 3 years now. I have a very passionate background in play and the right for children to play as well. But in my day job, I am an early years and childcare advisor for Devon County Council's early years and childcare service. So still very much supporting the early years provisions, but also with all the wraparound funding that's now available, having a real focus on children's play in the wraparound after school sector as well. So but deliver training, play training in my day job, as well as just being really involved with developing play training for the foundation as well, and other bits and pieces to go with the foundation. Tonight we are going to be looking at the first two playwork principles. So that is our aim this evening. So we'll be introducing the playwork principles, but tonight we will be focusing on just the first two of the principles, and we'll explain that when we come to looking at those principles. Because as the session says, this is all about what is play. And we need to be able to understand what play is before we actually go on and look at our role within play, how children play, etc. Because without that knowledge of what is play and what does play mean to everybody, we can't really go on and explore all the other topics along the line of these 12 sessions. So we'll be looking at the first two playwork principles. We'll then have an activity around determining what is play, what does it mean to us, but also looking at why play is so important. What are the benefits of play? How does it benefit children in their mental health and well-being, in their physical well-being as well? So those are kind of the three areas and aims that we will be looking at this evening.
When we talk about what is play, we're talking about it from the play worker approach. And because it's just such this tiny little four-letter word, yeah, it's used in an awful lot of ways. So we're not assuming anybody doesn't know what play is, but it's like we need to have that shared understanding from a play worker's approach, what we mean by play, and very much children's play.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so our first activity is really looking at, in order for us to understand how what play is, from as Karen said, from the play workers approach, we need to remember how we used to play. So what we'd like you to do is in the chat bar, put down um, how you used to play. Were you playing alone? Were you playing outside? Were you playing indoors? Were you playing with friends? If you're of a younger generation than I am, were you playing on IT? Were you, as I say, were you with friends? So just pop into the chat bar, how you used to play, and then we'll kind of revisit that in a minute.
So I'm just wondering, while people are doing that, having to think about how they used to play. I mean, and think back to when you were kind of, I don't know, 8, 9, 10. Um, and there will be differences generationally, but I can share with you. I grew up in a village in Warwickshire. And one of my play memories, I remember as a gang of us, we used to go up the churchyard and we used to sit around, those kind of big tomb stone that graves, um, and tell each other ghost stories and dare each other to put our hands inside the broken bits of the tomb until we got so scared we'd run away screaming. So there's one of my play experiences. Um,
Yeah, mine wasn't quite as adventurous as that, I have to say. I mean, I grew up in the countryside in Herefordshire. We had no housing around us. The farms were, about a quarter of a mile away from home, but we had the fields around us, and at the top of one of the fields was a bit of a hollow, with trees all around it, and there used to be vines that would hang down from the trees, so they became our rope swings. So the hollow was our den. The rope swings were like Tarzan that you see on the films of Tarzan, that he swings from tree to tree. So and we would spend many, many hours up there making, mud ovens and mud baths and all sorts of things. Away from home, no mobile phones, came back when you got hungry or were dirty, basically. So,
Well,
um,
I'd share quite a few of these. I'm keeping an eye on the chat, Helen.
mm,
So we've got playing outside in the countryside. Um, with other children of the same age, some slightly older. Yeah, I would say definitely a mixed group for us. Although I do remember trying to avoid my younger sister half the time. I'm getting away from her. Anne-Marie saying outside, playing with friends, bike riding, climbing. Climbing what? Trees, fences. Um, Trey saying playing pretend role playing different characters, using a lot of imagination again outside. The big group are talking, which is good. Going to the park with friends, playing outside with friends on bikes in parks, um, playing in the outdoors. Using our imagination with friends to play games. Becky's saying used to play indoors and outdoors with my sister and cousins. Make up games like horse riding stables. Yes, Becky, I'm with you there. Horses are a big thing, or pretending them. Make stages and pretend to be pop stars and actors. Um, or dress up in old bridesmaids dresses and play olden days. Definitely. I used to dress up in my mum's wedding dress and make my sisters do the whole of the Sound of Music. So, um, this interesting. So, um, Simon's saying in their group, one of the younger people had a completely different play style. It was video games. Kelsey saying imaginative play, rough play with cousins out in the woods. Anne-Marie's climbing anything. Uh, Maybe a bit naughty, but climbing on roofs was a fave. Definitely. Being
mm,
naughty is part of it, I think.
mm.
Lovely. Some lovely ideas
Yeah,
there.
yeah. I remember also one of my times was probably, well, in the true sense of playing, my parents were away, well, they were out. I was probably about 11-ish, something like that. Probably even younger than that, thinking about it. And the house that we lived in, it had a kind of a sloping roof that below the bedroom windows, which was the bay windows for the lounge and dining room below. And I remember climbing out of one bedroom window and thinking I could get all the way across this roof to the other bedroom window without falling off it. But sadly, I slipped down it and was hanging, holding on to the guttering, whilst my brother was stood below me going, "You wait till your mum and dad get home." And the bribes that went on between us, for him not to say anything to my parents. So but there was that element of risk, I could do this, and it didn't quite work out the way it was supposed to have done.
Yeah.
But
Thank you for sharing those. And there are, as we're beginning to see some similarities. There's a lot of outdoor play, a lot of memories being um, described outdoors. So, words which describe play. Um, can we think about so having a look at a list here of um, things that might describe play? Hoping you can see this kind of clearly. But out of this list of 18, could you pick the top five that would describe your play experience? So, out of all of these, which would be your top five? You might have done kind of all of them, but can you hone it down to kind of go, well, these are the kind of core five things that I think describe my kind of play experience when I was a kid. So we've got doing what I wanted to do, making things, playing outside, being away from adults, feeling free, not doing anything specific, doing things with an element of risk or daring. That's Anne-Marie and Helen, obviously. Playing board games, not being told what to do, playing safe, doing things I maybe shouldn't, playing indoors, having adults about, being shown how to do things, exploring for myself, watching TV or video, um, making up or being in my own world, or just being hanging around with my friends. So pick your top five.
This is always quite an interesting one to do because it's thinking about, if you put something down about being away from adults, how would the play have changed if adults were there? Thinking about whether it was indoors or outdoors, um, looking at um, taking those risks. Were there elements of risk there? And if there weren't, would that again have made it feel different if there had been elements of risk? So I think it's always useful to look at the different aspects of our memories of play and how that would have changed had there been other people around, as I say, indoors or outdoors.
So certainly what's coming out on top is number three, playing outside. Um, Followed by seven, doing things with an element of risk or daring. Um, Followed by 17, making up, being in my own world. Um, 4 and 15, being away from adults. Exploring for myself. And then we've got making things. Yeah, odd ones now, doing things I shouldn't. One for playing indoors, one just being with my friends. I think what's interesting then for us as play workers, okay, is this whole thing about, um, playing outside, because how many of us have spaces um that are indoors mainly, or we can't don't have as much access to outdoors. Um, it's lovely this, ha risk, doing it things with an element of risk or daring. So if that's our play memories, how relevant is it for kids, um, today? Are they still wanting the same things? Being away from adults, which is really depressing for play workers, isn't it? It's like, oh, they actually don't want us around. Surprise, surprise. No, they don't. Unless we're good kind of people, adults around children and their play. And that's, for me particularly, that is the big role of a play worker, is like, how can we support children's play and not impose on it, and not make them feel like, oh, there's adults hanging around and we can't play in the way that we want to, because that's about giving them the freedom to play. And I know we've all got a lot of constraints and we've got health and safety, but how, and some of these sessions moving forward are going to look at that dilemma that we have. Um, when you've got parents on one side and their expectations, but who are we there for at the end of the day to provide those kids? Yeah, so those are some of the questions, and some of the discussions, and the thinking over these sessions that we want to kind of share, because it's not easy being a play worker.
Mm. And I think it's also, I deliver this, or we have this exercise or this activity in a lot of the play training which I deliver in Devon. And it also gets you thinking as play workers, actually, I think as Karen sort of said, what does this look like for our settings? What does this look like for children of today? Can children experience all of these sort of sentences that we've got on the screen at the moment, and if not, why not? And it is really something to take back into your provisions and really sort of step back and look and think, well, okay, well, that's what I used to do. That's how I used to play. Do children in my setting have access to be able to do that now? And if not, what are the barriers towards that? And that is something that, as you know, going forward, we'll be looking at some of the barriers to children's play and um, what is it that we can do to support children's play, the role of the play worker. So it's a really kind of useful exercise to take ourselves back to think about how did we play, what were we experiencing, and can the children today have those same experiences, either away from the setting or in setting.
And I'll be devil's advocate here as well, because, we've already said there is one young person in the group who that wasn't their play experience. And maybe we make assumptions that, oh, that's how we used to play. So therefore that's how kids should play today. Um, it is a changing world. It
Mm.
is a changing world, and technology is far more dominant than it certainly was when I was a kid. I didn't have a mobile phone, disappeared all day and just came back when I was hungry. We have to balance a changing world with what we mean by play and what children want from play, but also opening up and broadening their
Mm,
experiences of
absolutely.
the freedom to play.
Absolutely. And my own children, they grew up with IT. One of them was very sporty, so hardly ever used it. The other one, who's now 26, that's his friendship group. His friendship group is online. And he does a lot of what we would call playing online. He plays the games and he does all these things, but he's talking to people across the world. And as long as it's a safe environment for them to do that in, it's the new way of playing. And as Karen says, we have to acknowledge that um, and bring that into our settings when as and when it's appropriate to do so. So the next sort of thing that we're going to look at are those playwork principles. So I'm hoping that as play workers or people working in the play sector are familiar with the playwork principles. And they playwork the eight playwork principles, as I say, today we're going to focus on the first two, but there are a set of eight playwork principles. And basically, if you work in the early years, you've got the early years foundation stage, which is the Bible for every early years practitioner. When it comes to play work, the I would suggest that the play work principles are also the set of guiding principles, the Bible, if you like, for all of our play workers and those who work in the play sector. Um, and they basically describe what's so special and, if you like, unique about play work, which are the play work principles one and two. And then the remaining principles of 3 to 8 look at the playwork approach to working with children and young people. So that's how you, as a play practitioner, can support children's play and the environment in which children play, and basically be that advocate for children's play, the voice for children's play. Um, but the playwork principles do apply to every single child in your setting, no matter who they are, their background, where they come from, what their cultural background is, what their religious background is, whether there's disabilities, SEN, the playwork principles apply to absolutely all children in your setting. Um, they were originally developed and adopted in 2005 by the Playwork Principles Scrutiny Group, which was established by Play Wales and done so in consultation with the UK playwork sector as well. And as I say, they were adopted back in 2005. Before that, for any of us who are old enough to have worked in the sector long enough, you will probably remember the Skills Active values and assumptions. And these superseded those values and assumptions back in 2005 and became the Playwork Principles. And they've kind of gone on to underpin the UK National Occupational Standards, which are in the process of being kind of rewritten at the moment. But they also informed qualifications development and the delivery particularly in Wales and the UK around qualifications as well. So, they do play a huge part when it comes to government and statutory organisations looking at children's play, they are very much, in the limelight, if you like, when people are looking at children's play. And they have been adopted internationally as well. So they're not just a UK based set of principles. They are adopted across the world as well. Um, and they kind of established that professional and ethical framework for play work. Um, and, and they are kind of regarded as a whole. You can't take them as individual principles. They are looked at as a whole. And whilst we are going to be kind of looking at one and two today, and then next week looking at the remaining six principles, um, we will, they are supposed to be looked at as a whole rather than just individual ones. Um, and as I said, they kind of describe what's unique about play and play work and provide the play work perspective for working with children and young people. And they're based on the recognition that children and young people's capacity for positive development will be enhanced if given access to the broadest range of environments and play opportunities. And that quote has been taken from the scrutiny group. So, um, as I say, we're going to be looking at principles one and two. What is special and unique about play? So I will hand over to Karen because in a roundabout sort of way, we are actually going to turn it on its head and we're going to look at Playwork Principle 2 first and come back to Playwork Principle 1. And Karen will explain why.
She will, yeah. And for me, this is always a logical way of working through them. When we've talked about our own memories, of play and everything, but then really unpicking and really agreeing. And this is what the Playwork principles are very much about. It's like, let's agree a definition as a Playwork sector. So I always start with Playwork Principle 2 because it is defining play. And it says initially, play is a process. And we can stop there because it's not about making something. It can be, but what's important is the process in making something. So some of you were saying things like, "Oh, making up and dressing up and using my imagination." That is what's important, more so probably than the end result. It's the process that the children and young people go through in negotiating and creating, trying things out. Because often we fail at a lot of things. We're trying to climb a tree. It might take several attempts. When we actually climb the tree and get up there and go, way, brilliant. But the process is also part of the play. So I hope that's kind of clear that, and this is sometimes where we as adults or other adults around can kind of go, oh, but you haven't finished. You've got all this stuff out and you haven't finished. Actually, that's not what it's about. And children will kind of engage in something, and then something else will take their attention, and it's that process that becomes important. There was a little lad once who was making some stuff and everything. And when he'd finished it, so we always at the adventure playground where I worked in Glasgow had there was always a craft activity on the table because quite a few kids wanted to paint and make stuff. And this kid sat down, made what he wanted and showed it and was kind of like, oh, that's great. And he said, can I go and play now? And it was that kind of note and that response, and the kid made think, are you not playing now? And he said, well, no, I was just making this because you wanted us to make something. So can you see the difference? It was like his choice was like, oh, I'm doing that because the adults asked, or I'm doing that. And sometimes children, there's unspoken rules that we don't think about. And he was like, he'd seen that as like, oh, I've got to make one of these, but then I can go off and do what I want to do. Um, so that's moving us on to freely chosen. It's what the child wants to do and what they want to do, personally directed in the way that they want to do it. So I want to play with this thing, but I want to do it under the table, or I want to do it out there, or I want to do it upside down, or whatever. Yeah. I'm choosing what I want to do, how I want to do it, and why I want to do it. This intrinsically motivated. Because in the playwork sector, and in the discussion and development of these playwork principles, it was very much felt that this play was a drive that's part of the human condition, that's as important as eating, drinking, sleeping. Yeah. We all, from the moment we're born, play. We interact with babies by playing. It's our first form of communication. It's our first interaction with the world, and children will play with things to find out. So it's a process, freely chosen, personally directed. This is the way that the child wants to do it, and from some deep drive within them, I feel this need. A kid came into the playground when I was doing scrap store play pods, and it just came up to me and went, I need to march. I was like, fine, let's march, shall we? And we marched around the playground, and they went, oh, that feels so much better. Because sometimes in schools, for some kids, for a lot of kids, that kind of sitting down and concentrating is just like, come out to the playground, charge out into the playground. And he just wanted to march. We marched. So to summarize that, children and young people determine, control the content and intent of their play, following their own instincts for their own ideas and their own interests in their own way for their own reasons. Sometimes that is difficult for us as adults. Sometimes the way they play from looking outside it can be difficult for us. Children's play can be quite challenging. Children's play can reveal quite a bit about children and their families, but actually children play stuff out, and understanding it and observing it and watching it is very much part of our job as play workers, because the more we watch and observe and the more we're around children playing, the more we'll learn about it, and draw on our own memories. But watch children, watch them, observe them,
Mm,
see how they play.
mm. I totally agree with you there, definitely. And I do wonder how many times and how often we do actually step back and watch children playing. And for those of you who are familiar with the play cycle, of which I think we will briefly, no, we don't visit on this session, but we will at one of the other sessions. I think we've got a whole session actually on the play cycle coming up. You'll recognize that kind of constant changing of movement and from one kind of play space to another play space. I think with children's play, when you really watch it happening, it doesn't start and it doesn't finish. Um, and as the quote says, it's for their own interest, their own beginning, their own reasons for doing it. And sometimes with no goal in mind, no achievement in mind, and it's just being able to do what they want when they want, who they want, or who with they want to do it, and where they want to do it. There doesn't have to be a specific place for children to play in. Um, Children play wherever they want to, and wherever they are. Um, and as an example of that, when I was doing my postgraduate at Gloucestershire University a few years ago, one of the modules on the course was to go and observe children playing, but not in a play setting. It was, anywhere other than a play setting. So because of where I live now in Somerset, quite close to the M5, I decided to go and sit on the M5 services.
I thought you were going to say you're going to sit on the side of the motorway, and then
Oh no.
Helen. Watch children play on the
No, no,
side
no,
of the
not
motorway.
not
Oh,
quite,
good
not quite.
one.
No, I sat in the M5 services. It was a busy Easter holiday weekend, and we had traffic coming up from Cornwall. So, a lot of these families had been stuck in traffic for hours on end, coming up from Cornwall and Devon. And when the children got out of the car, and I sat sort of, where McDonald's is, and I think it's Costa up there as well, and I was watching the children. The parents were queuing very nicely for the McDonald's, and you had the rope barrier, as you quite often get. And adults were very nicely queuing one after the other. The children, on the other hand, were using this rope barrier as a play space. They were going over it, they were going under it, they were going round it, they were chasing each other up and down it. And I have to say that not one of those adults in that queue actually looked at those children as if to say, "What are you doing? Why can't you keep your child under control and everything?" But it just goes to show that actually children will play where children are. They don't have to have that specific play space, and they were doing it for their own reason, for their own interest, ideas, and they were freely choosing it, personally directing it, and intrinsically motivated by it. So I think it's just step back, watch children playing. So with principle, so that's principle two. Principle one is a little bit more kind of ambiguous, if you like, and I think that is the nature of the first two principles anyway. But even all eight, they are a little bit ambiguous. But certainly one and two, again, you kind of have to read it as a whole. But to understand it, it's kind of taking it apart like we have done with the first one. So, and it says, all children and young people need to play, and there is that need to play. And as Karen gave that example earlier about, the little boy completing something and then going, well, can I go and play now? He had that innate need to play, and it's that raw play, it's that rich play, it's that natural play, if you like. There is an impulse to play. We don't need to teach children how to play. Children can do it quite happily on their own. There is that innate feeling and need to want to go and play. And again, if you watch children out in your settings or out in the playgrounds, etc., um, and even if they're just standing there and watching, they're processing what's going on. They're thinking about their next move. Who are they going to play with? Where are they going to play? What are they going to play with? It's that innate feeling. It's that kind of butterflies, if you like, that we get, when we're going to go and do something exciting or scary. For me, I absolutely hate flying, and I've only ever flown a few times in my life. And if I'm sitting in an airport, I've got those fear, my stomach's churning, my heart rate is up. And it's the same innate feeling for children when they go off and play and want to go and play. So it's
I think it's yeah, it's that drive I was talking about earlier, Helen, isn't it? That
yeah,
we're born with it. We're born with it. And I just want to flip right back to that first word on Playwork Principle One, all. And
all
it does mean all children. So having worked quite a bit with disabled children, and they still need to play, and often disabled children, I don't know if any of you work with disabled children, but sometimes disabled children might need a bit of support to play because of their impairment or the fact that they've often been surrounded by adults and don't have the freedom to go out to play, or they're put in a taxi or a minibus and they sent away to, you know, across borders sometimes. When I say borders, I mean county borders, although that sounds really wrong. I don't mean county lines. But you know what I mean? They can be sent a long way to the school that's going to meet their needs. And so they come back home and they're not on, their friends aren't around them. When I worked in the after school club at the special school in Birmingham, Oliver was 10 and was just so excited one day because he got his first play day. Well, most of our kids, are probably going back to friends' houses, or parents are, meeting up after school and going back to houses, and kids go and play while, we have a cup of coffee and catch up. For some disabled kids, that's not the norm. And so, yeah, but they need play as much as any other child.
yeah,
So that all
absolutely.
children does mean all
All
children.
children. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And I think, for all children that playing, that intrinsic biological trait, if you like, for playing, it is the main way, or for children to be able to self-explore, and for that self-expression as well. They use play to be able to play out some of their experiences, whether they are positive experiences or in some cases very negative experiences. I do a huge amount with our safeguarding teams, and we're constantly working with children who are playing out some of the most horrific experiences they've been in. It's their way of expression. It's their way of being able to understand the world around them and the things that they've seen and heard. Um, and it's about creating their own self-identity, as I say, by kind of playing out, rehearsing, developing their own emotional and physical senses, um, and they do all of this through play.
What would
Um,
be, what, sorry, Helen, what would be quite good is if we just look at each of those words. So if that statement is saying play is biological in the chat, folks, what, how can
yeah,
play be biological? How can it be biological? How does it help? Um, yeah, children develop.
yeah,
Put some ideas in the chat. If you think back to your play memory, climbing trees, yeah, what how is that kind of supporting children biologically? Um, give us some ideas in the chat. So Becky's put fine motor skills and not just fine ones, big ones as well. Um, and I think for yeah, use of muscles. Thank you, Tammy. Yeah, definitely. Um, if they don't kind of if they're not physical, and we have a lot of discussion at the moment, don't we, about obesity and overweight children and everything. Play, I know Wendy Russell from University of Gloucestershire, where Helen did her qualification, and where I'm still working there. Um, they've done studies where just walking through a park, they've monitored children's movement around the park. And whereas adults will often keep to the paths, children are whizzing around, because they don't just walk in straight lines. Yeah, exercise. Yeah, use of language. Absolutely. Um, Making up. I am screaming at the radio at the moment when they're talking about teaching oratory skills in schools because I'm a drama specialist as well. And I'm like, it's flipping drama. It's drama. Why have you taken out, the one kind of topic, the one subject where the whole point is to speak and to speak as other people and things like that. Yeah. Outlet for stress and emotion, exercise, coordination, using their own initiative, imagine spatial awareness, absolutely. And children's movement in playgrounds, most adults couldn't cope with it because they're running around and they never bump into each other, unless they do it, by accident or because they mean it. So yeah, lots and lots of just naturally from playing, children will move. I have been in a playground again doing scraps or play pods, watching the PE lesson before lunchtime, and I've seen a whole class of 30 kids in a line taking it in turns to put the ball in the netball net. But there was very little physical activity in that 30 kids waiting in a line, one at a time, throw the ball, then you went to the end of the line. Playtime, suddenly they're charged, and you're just like, can you not see? Can you not see the benefits of play? Yeah. So biologically, lots and lots of development going on when children play. Psychologically, yeah, working things out, thinking about things, taking a risk is a massive psychological thing. Taking a risk. Can I do it? Can't I do it? All my peers are watching me, all those kinds of things. And all that social necessity. So, yeah, social necessity. Tell us, how through play socialization happens. Chuck some things in there. You're very good, you lot, at putting stuff in the chat. Some top marks. Yep, negotiation, great word, great word. Taking turns, absolutely. And this whole thing about sometimes in schools like, oh well, we've only got one of them, they have to share. Great. That's about negotiation. You know, we can't give kids, 30 of in a class, 30 things sometimes. So negotiate, share, take turns. Fairness, lovely friendships. Yeah. Yeah, and some of these things are things you cannot teach. They are experiential, they're experiential learning things. Working through conflict, lovely. Yeah, sharing friendships, and making friends, falling out with friends, massive amount of skills being learned. And all this happens naturally through play. It's why it is so important. And it's about time everybody started standing up and shouting about it and making it aware. Yes, education's important. I'm not denying education's important, but unless we have happy children, sociable children, children who can take risks, children who can work things out, the rest of it kind of will fall into place. Yeah, learning about different cultures and different abilities is my whole thing about, inclusion, within schools, within settings, on streets, the children that live on that streets, why play streets and things are so important. Knowing our neighbours. Um, Great. Some lovely, lovely comments. Yeah, all that is about that social necessity and not just socialization. It's a social necessity. We are human beings and we live together, and actually learning about each other. It's this language of play. And I always say you can have 5 kids on a beach, who all speak 5 different languages, but they'll play together because the one thing they've got in common is this language of play. And without all of that, without this kind of play that happens, healthy, it's absolutely essential to the healthy development and well-being of individuals and communities. A few years ago, well, many years ago, when New Labour were in and we were doing the Play Shaper program and going around and training local authorities, um, and research was being done. They noticed that if people drove into an area looking for a house, um, then if they saw children outside playing, they kind of went, "Oh, that looks like a safe place to live." And the house prices went up because people kind of wanted to live in these areas because children outside playing looked like a good community, looked like a good neighborhood. And I remember on one of the training days, um, a woman saying, she said, I've lived in this area for 10 years, 10 years or more. She said, used to go to work, come back. She said, then I had a baby. She said, and then I started meeting my neighbors and people in the community. She said, because I was out and about with a baby and I was going to things and I was meeting other people. Children are incredibly important for us kind of as adults as well, socializing and fitting into communities. Different
Mm.
family setups, definitely, Becky. Definitely. It's about time we got away from, this family idea of 2.2 kids. And yeah, children come from I know teaching my students, I've got students from a range of backgrounds, a range of family setups. Yeah, that's much more the norm now. Yeah, we don't talk about wicked stepmothers anymore. They used to that, they were in fairy tales as the wicked stepmother because you never, it was too close to have, a wicked mother. But now, of course, we have many stepmothers and stepfathers and all sorts. And yeah, um, exposing and discussing and children learning from each other about that. Oh, my family do this. Oh, my family do it this way. Yeah, we all know that when we move in with somebody and we kind of go, oh, you do that. Yeah, it's all important for learning about each other. And in that way, we break down barriers, in my opinion. I'll
Yes.
shut up now, Helen.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So just as an example of as exactly what Karen's been saying about, the places that children play in, the spaces and the importance for children playing. And this is taken from OP and OP. And the quote is where children are is where they play. And as I said before, children will play in whatever spaces they want to play in. They will create their own play spaces. They will create their own play. And it is about, the use of their bodies, the movement, the interactions
Mm.
with human and non-human resources. So as going back to those very first slides when we looked at about, how we used to play, how many of us actually involved playing with other children or having adults around, and actually how many of us just played on our own, but using other resources as well. And it as we said, it lasts as long as it does and as short as it does. Um, and once the children have moved away from that space, the space returns back to what it was, whatever that space happened to be. So, in my example with the children in McDonald's, once everybody had bought their food and it began to quieten down again because people were heading back off on their journeys, so that place became very quiet again. There were very few people around, and that rope that people were queuing in just became a rope again where people queued. It wasn't, a skipping rope. It wasn't something that you could crawl under or over, etc. It was just a piece of rope that people went around. So, it's important to recognize that, as I said, where children are is where they will begin to play. And again, look at the space that in your own settings and see how children are using that play space, and how long that play lasts for. Um, and just again, as another example, when I was doing my postgrad, I was in one of our local gardens nearby to me, um, and I was watching a little boy. He was probably about between 3 and 4, so he wasn't that old at all, and he was out with his family. Well, I say approximately 1 year old there. So yes, so yeah, he probably was actually with his family. And there was a big water fountain there, so that the water was spraying over the top and then coming back into the pond below it. But you could reach in and touch the water, and he probably spent about, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes there, just putting his hands in the water, trying to grab it, wasn't able to catch it. He was giggling, particularly when the water came across onto his face. Um, and 1 minute he was really concentrating and his little tongue was sticking out, particularly when he was trying to grab it or to stop the water. But then other times he was gurgling away and laughing and he spent all his time just doing that. And the adults around him didn't intervene, they didn't stop him. He took as long or as short a time as he wanted to do it. He would occasionally turn back just to make sure that his parents were there. And just for that little bit of reassurance, but then would carry on playing, and he only stopped playing or doing that when something else caught his attention. Now for a 1 year old to be carrying on and doing that for around about 10, 15 minutes is quite a long length of time of concentration. And as I say, he only moved on because something else caught his concentration or his attention. um but but from this quote, we can see how that kind of fits into those first two principles. He was intrinsically motivated. He was really choosing what he wanted to do. He was having all those biological experiences of those fine motor controls of trying to catch something, the giggling, all the psychological stuff for him, about giggling and concentrating. And so just when you're watching children playing, you can see how the first two principles of the playwork principles will play out in every time that children are playing, and that as play workers or people who work in the play sector, that's what you're looking for. That's what you're trying to provide opportunities for, so that for children to be able to freely choose when they're going to play, how they're going to play. So as I say, these are just kind of a couple of quotes that fit in with the first two principles. So, Karen, I don't know if you've got anything to add.
Nope, because I think we're coming to more stuff,
Yep, yep.
expand those.
So we've kind of looked at Playworks Principle one and two. And what we'd like you to do now, again in the chat bar, is actually tell us what does this look like in your setting? How do children have those opportunities for personally directed, intrinsically motivated, and freely chosen play? Does it support the biological, psychological, and social necessity of play? So again, have a think. If you're in a group of people, have a chat amongst yourselves, and then pop it into the chat bar to see, to let us know what does it look like in your setting.
Yeah, what
And,
kind of things can your kids do
and if
in
you
settings?
maybe struggle with that, if there are barriers, then it would be quite useful for us to kind of have a look at some of those as well.
When I was a MVQ assessor, I remember watching a play worker just bring in 3 bags of shredded paper and tip them out on the floor. And yeah, the children played for at least half an hour with this shredded paper. One even went outside, brought in a wheelbarrow, put it all in the wheelbarrow and moved it about and dumped it. They put it on their heads as wigs. They buried, and it literally was 3 bags of shredded newspaper. And then at the end of when they'd finished with it, she just got out the broom and swept it all up. A couple of other kids came and helped, but she never asked them. Yeah, swept it all up, put it back in bags, and then it went off for recycling. But just that for the first
Mm.
bit of the session, um, she saw it as an opportunity.
And I think also maybe sometimes we maybe put too much out for the children. And I remember again when I was doing my course, Stuart Lester was one of my tutors who's very sadly not with us anymore. But he was saying that he was asked to go into an after school club down in Cornwall, and because they were really struggling to kind of know what to do to provide activities for the children. And he basically took everything away and put everything away and left them with a table and two chairs. And the staff were horrified, like, what can we do with this? And he said, just watch, just watch. For the next hour, those children that came in, yes, initially they were kind of like, where's everything gone? But they realized that that's all they had. And for the next hour, that table became a den, it became a train, it became a plane, it became everything you could think of. The chairs were, something to sit on, something to climb on, something to turn upside down. And they got themselves a couple more chairs. And it was, he said it was absolutely fascinating to just watch what the children did with such few resources, really, and
Yeah.
how they changed it into something completely different.
I had a play worker once who worked in an after school club and often didn't get to use the hall. I don't know if that's anybody else's experiences. And was in a classroom and kind of couldn't touch stuff, didn't have much stuff. And she did exactly the same thing. She said, I just turned all the tables upside down. She said, I just let the kids, should I got some bits of material? She said, we had the whole session with them playing with the tables upside down. I'm just going to go through everybody's stuff
Mhm.
then. I've actually, so there's lots of den building, arts and crafts, cooking, um, preparing their own food, and opportunities to create their own play, through play opportunities, going outside to play, multiple rooms. Oh, you lucky people. Um, Food activities, stacking paper cups and jumping over them. I love this tray. A hands-on nature anarchy zone. Brilliant. Anything with the word anarchy in appeals to me. Children like to dig, climb, yeah, make forts, run, play with mud, yeah, mess, mess, mess. Outside play from Gillian. Um, Becky's saying they encourage play with adult interaction when needed. Board games, craft activities, access to toys, and they can flow from inside to outside. Um, But yeah, she said we have planned activities, but I think simplifying them could be key. Um, 30-minute time check from Sean. Den making, yeah. And it's you have to work. I don't know how many of you have your own spaces or your shared spaces. Shared spaces are also, difficult to get stuff in. So thinking about simplifying them and, um, yeah, finding out and watching what the kids needs. Cool.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah, so Tammy's saying, when I was in kindergarten, the most prized items were three planks. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, taking children on trips is really, yeah, I mean, I'm sure somewhere down the line we'll start looking at the Playwork curriculum. Um, yeah, new experiences and new opportunities. It's about knowing our kids. What do they have a lot of? What can we give new? Yeah,
Mm.
it's do you know this play worker job is massive? It's a massive job and it's a real experienced job.
So kind of thinking about um, the last activity in terms of what does this look like in your play setting? Now go back to thinking, evaluating your play setting. So what actually makes a good quality play setting? If you are up against barriers, so as Karen said, you might be in a shared space, you might be in a school hall, um, or you might even be in a school classroom, which a lot of my after school clubs, where they're based in schools, they are based in school classrooms. So they are navigating around the tables and chairs, and have very little kind of space in which to really move around in. Or they might have to start off in the school hall and then move into a classroom and then move into the library area. There's all sorts of things there that you're kind of managing and working with. But in the ideal world, what would make a good quality play setting if you had that open space, it belonged to you? Just pop into the chat the things that would make a really good quality play setting, and maybe we can talk about some of those things and maybe find a solution to it to help you out.
I guess it's a question of like, yeah, how do we know what is a good play setting? How do we judge? How do we make that decision?
Mm,
How do we know that we're, meeting children's play needs and their wants? Yeah, child focus. Simon saying ch children having a voice on what they want. Yeah, yes, listening to children is
mm,
really important.
mm.
Sometimes children are rarely listened to. They rarely have much power and control. And the one thing they should have control over in a lot of ways is play. It's their thing.
I
Um,
know recently I've just been working with one of the schools in my area that are looking to access the funding for the wraparound care. That they already have an after school club, and I went in and had a look, but they don't open every day of the week, and they've got the numbers are quite low, and I walked into the space and I thought, well, I'm not surprised the numbers are low, to be quite honest with you. It was a very unimaginative space.
Well,
It
Tammy's here saying enough room for imagination. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
you
that
want children to walk into your space and kind of go, oh, this is exciting, or this is something. I'm sure my play worker with her shredded paper, it was a one-off. It was just something new. Like who was saying earlier about, children like exploring Simon, taking kids out, exploring new
mm,
spaces. Other people said loose parts, things to climb, minimizing hazards, but allowing risk. And yeah, for play workers, it's a massive one, isn't it? Because we're so kind of like governed by we're responsible and health and safety and what parents might say. Um, and yeah, hopefully
mm,
down the line we'll talk about this, but how you promote your setting. If you put on all your information, this is a safe place for your children to be. You're setting yourselves up to fail. So just say this is an exciting place.
mm,
Um, Anne-Marie's saying we are lucky we have our own room with our own outside areas. Yeah. And come rain or shine. And Becky's saying dedicated, knowledgeable play workers. Yeah. Um, you can have the best setting in the world, Becky, but if you haven't got people in that room who understand play and the importance of play work, yeah, again, you can have n nothing and great play workers who will find stuff. Or you can have a fantastic space and adults in there that are just going to adulterate the play all the time. Yeah, lovely, some lovely comments. Thank you.
And I think that that's where that consultation with children comes into its own, because going back to this space, it was the staff were sort of saying, how can we make it more imaginative? How can we change it? And I said, well, ask the children. It's their
Yeah.
space. They're in here, whether they choose to be here or whether they have to be here. Make it their space. Ask them what would they like in here. Ask them what colors walls they would like. You've got free reign in here. You've been told by the school you can decorate it to whatever you want it to be. So ask the children.
Don't ask them the color, just give them the paint. That's my approach. Yeah. If you're that lucky to be able to paint it, that's really,
Yeah,
really,
yeah. So
that's really
it
great.
is, it is about it's being their space, and making it the best that
Yeah.
you possibly can for them.
Brilliant. So kind of, yeah, sort of bringing it all to a close and sort of rounding it all off, really. We've talked about the benefits of play, but kind of going, well, why is it important? Why is it important to us as play workers? Why is it important to children? Um, because if we don't think it's important, then we're never going to strive for it to be the best experience for kids or have those conversations with parents where you kind of go, well, actually, it's really important they get messy. If you don't want their clothes to get messy, perhaps send them with some other clothes, or we've got some big old t-shirts here. Um, and I think back to when we were kids, and my mum used to do washing on a Monday in a twin tub that flooded the kitchen. And now we've all got washing machines where you chuck clothes in, and we've got, different sort of fibers that it can be, a lot different and a lot easier. Um, but yeah, so summarize yourself. Why is this play important? What are you taking away from today, or what's reaffirmed what you already think? Just drop those in the chat. So what's the override? Why is play important? I think next time, Helen, we should have a nice piano player in the background. So while people are thinking, we can play nice music. Anybody play the piano can offer it. Yeah, so Simon started with social skills. Yeah, it's got to, I'm not saying any one of these is more important, but this is about what you feel, kind of just summarizing for yourself. Um, but yeah, social skills. It is that time when kids can chat with each other and yeah, learn about each other and make friends and develop their vocabulary and learn to assert themselves and fall out and decide, why and who's good to them and who's not. It's a bit like watching Married at First Sight, watching them all fall apart. Anyway, yeah, physical needs, social skills, problem solving, imagination, and self-expression. Yeah, imagination, creativity, and I don't mean creativity in the arts and crafts. I mean creativity in thinking outside the box. How do I do that? How do I solve that? It is really important. It's really important for kind of later on in life, as well as kind of as children and young people, problem solving. The world is changing and we need to be able to kind of think outside the box sometimes and getting bored.
It
Absolutely,
comes back to
Jamie.
those social necessities. It is a
Yeah,
social
yeah.
necessity
If you
being able
don't,
to do all
if
those
we if
things.
we always give children things and they don't get bored, actually they don't learn when they're bored to kind of go, I'm bored, I'm bored, I'm bored. What shall I do now? Yeah, find something else and help themselves. So play is important because it helps children explore, learn and develop in their own way, be creative, understand the world around them, build confidence, interact with others, solve problems. Yes, I want to burst into a Whitney Houston song now, Becky. So I believe that children are our future. But it's right, isn't it? We are. nurture, if we don't, this is my personal thing now, if we don't nurture tolerance and acceptance and kindness, um, then, it is about creating a world where, yeah, these children can cope and live and learn from it and learn from
Mm,
each other.
mm,
So yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thanks for sharing all those. So yeah, we'd put these up. I think you've got them all: friendships, relationships, health and well-being. I've at university are dealing with so many mental health issues. I'm sure some of you are as well. It's like, every day I'm kind of going, how can we help these young people? Why are they not resilient? Why are they unable to cope with such small things in life? Why are they anxious? And it is a real issue. I think, the more we can sort of enable their play experiences to be good quality, um, then I think that's really important.
I
Yeah,
think we,
emotions, fun, inclusion and inequalities, different ages playing together, local children. Yeah, resilience, coping strategies, confidence, achievements. Children for me are they're so aware that they're being tested, that pressure is on now to do exams and get good qualifications. It's not the be all and end all. Actually, we never praise or acknowledge children's kindness or children's ability to cope or children's ability to negotiate and sort things, and all the other immense skills that are and kind of qualities of being human, that I think really are as important, if not more. Risk assessing is really, really important. Children one day won't be um, yeah, yeah. Thank you, Becky. Yes. Um, risk if they can't risk assess, they can't keep themselves safe. So we can't always do it for them. That we've got to let them go as parents ourselves, bit by bit. Let them go. Let them be responsible. Let them be able to judge a safe situation, an unsafe situation. Let them be able to judge if that rope's going to hold their weight or that plank is going to stay up for their den. Their environment, knowing their environment. If they don't go out to play, if they're constantly inside their house, they have no mental knowledge of the geographical area that they live in, and it becomes scary. It's scary if I don't know what is down that road or down that lane or down that gully, as we might have said in the Black Country. It's really important that children feel part of their communities, and play out and play with others.
mm. And I think with the health and well-being, we know since the pandemic that children's and adults, but children's mental health has gone up through the roof, and we've got children as young as 3 and 4, really struggling with their mental health. So having those opportunities to just play and make sense of what's been happening, and build up that resilience and those coping strategies is so important. And I think, it's not only the physical health and well-being, it's also that emotional health and well-being, and being able to um have understand that it's physical risk as well as emotional risk as well.
Yeah.
For a lot of children that are coming into the schools at the moment, it's just taking that step into a school for some children is a huge emotional risk. So it's recognizing that it's not just a physical risk, it is also the emotional risk that some of our children are coping with at the moment. And acknowledging that, as Karen said, acknowledging that they are doing really well. Um, but also, as an example of the emotional risk for children, one of my colleagues, she was saying that she was working in an after school club, um, many years ago, and there was a little boy there, and he was about 7 years old, and he was going, "Oh, I can't do it, I can't do it, I'm really struggling, I can't do it, I can't do it," and she was going, "Well, you can do it, you know you can do it, so just take your time." And this went on for sort of 4 or 5 minutes or so. And she was telling me this, and I was naturally thinking that it was something to do with maybe walking across balancing beam or something quite physical. What it actually turned out to be was that he wanted to have a go at knitting. But because he was the only boy in the group that was going to pick up the knitting needles and the knitting wool, he was feeling embarrassed that he was wanting to do it. He didn't know whether he had the skills to be able to do it because the girls were quite happily doing it. And it was all of that emotional turmoil that was going on for him. He ended up doing it, and he actually ended up knitting himself a lovely, lovely scarf, she said. But it was that emotional risk, but the encouragement that she and the other staff gave him to be able to do that, really paid off. It gave him that confidence. It gave him that ability to be able to acknowledge his own self-esteem and his own self awareness as well. So we do need to give children and those opportunities to be able to have those emotional risks for their own health and well-being.
What you need to tell them next time is knitting was invented by fishermen because they
Yeah,
knitted their nets. So it was
yeah,
predominantly, and they knitted their sweaters. So yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
know.
And I think as well with things like that, also what you can do is change the dynamics of it. You know, what's wrong with, I don't know, knitting with two big wooden spoons or chopsticks, or do you know what I mean? You can kind of introduce it so we break away from any gender specific things,
Mm,
or we
mm,
just make it, knitting is just literally making patterns out of materials. It's macrame, it's all, but yeah, it's basket weaving. It's a range of things, isn't it? So broadening sometimes those experiences. This is just sort of summarizing then, the benefits, we've talked about building resilience. And if you when you take risks and you have that little bit of adrenaline, and this is I'm talking about little risks, I'm not talking about trauma, which that huge rush of adrenaline is more damaging. But as we take little risks and we have that adrenaline, those hormones feeding our brain, those are the things that start to build a resilient brain and building resilience then in a person. Similarly, when children laugh and when we're happy, those happy endorphins again lead to healthier brains. So the more we can have fun and laughter and have good, healthy endorphins fielding and building our brains, so much the better. And play can do a lot of things supported by great play workers. We've talked about social benefits, friendships, friendship groups, different ages. Um, if anyone is interested, um, I'll put it in the chat. There's a TED talk by Sir Ken Robinson, who's an amazing guy who talks about creativity. I think it's called Educational Paradigms. But he talks about is quite critical, I have to say, of the school system. But it's a lovely cartoony drawn thing. And he talks about why do we believe why our schools are based on a factory system? There's a batch of kids go in September and a batch of kids come out in July. Um, and actually, why do we assume that they're all the same? Because they're not. And so the benefits of playing and being around different ages and abilities is really essential. I had a kid on my playground who really was struggling to learn to read, and he was 8, about 7 or 8, and he sat with a 5-year-old who could read, and he's there sitting kind of going, well, what's that word say? And literally the 5-year-old really was teaching him um, to um, to learn how to read. But of course, when you get older, and adults know this, when they're, adults are struggling to learn to read, all the books are really babyish. So this child used to sit in the afternoons when he came after school with this younger kid, and he'd pretend that he was kind of, teaching him to read and listening to him read, but he was actually learning off this younger child. So just because children are different ages, they have different abilities and experiences that aren't necessarily in parallel with their age group. So, lots of social benefits, physical benefits, cognitive benefits, all that brain development and thinking and judging and learning, and hopefully good experiences that will lead to good mental health and well-being, as well as those emotional, feeling confident, feeling you're good at something, having those experiences that you've been talking about, those new experiences. There was a play worker who took a bunch of kids from Birmingham to the seaside. Well, we're a bit landlocked, but in Birmingham, although we've got lots of canals. But this kid ran fully dressed into the sea because he'd never seen the sea before. And it was this, I'm talking October half term. I wasn't not talking summer holiday. And he said this kid just stood in the sea and we couldn't get him out because he's just stood in this vast amount of water. And if you imagine, seeing that for the first time when you're sort of slightly older and going, flip it, all this water, look at it, and I can't see the edge of it, those experiences are invaluable if we can give those to kids. So yeah, just summarizing why this little play stuff and why we've only just looked at principles 1 and 2, because what is play and why is it so important? I'll shut up now.
That's fine. So just really to summarize, yeah, hopefully this evening we have covered, the first two principles, and you can begin to see how they are embedded in everything that you do on a daily basis when you're, with the children, but also maybe encouraging you to maybe step back a little bit and just observe and listen and watch the children playing, and how they're playing, when they're playing, who they're playing with, and as I say, to see those first two principles embedded in what you're doing and what they're doing as well. And we've looked at, what is play, looking back at our own play experiences and transferring those memories and that information that we've received into what we can now do with the children in our own play settings, and look at what we're offering and what's available for the children and the importance of all of that, and establishing why is it so important that children can play, and what are the benefits of children being able to play, and if you're missing some of those areas, then actually do you need to reevaluate your play setting so that children can have those experiences, um, for their own health and well-being, for the social necessity, all of those things that we've discussed this evening. And I think it's also about not being afraid to challenge, particularly if you are in maybe a shared space or a school-based setting, and there's lots and lots of restrictions around. It is actually being able to positively challenge and say, this is why we're doing this. This is why we don't sit down and do homework. This is the benefit of actually why we are doing and providing this space, this environment for the children. And hopefully it will give you that kind of empowered empowerment to be able to challenge some of those difficult conversations with
Yeah.
staff, teaching staff, parents
And
even.
from our point of view, it'd be really good just to get some feedback if you find this useful. I say this is the first of our sessions. We've got several more coming up. So we've started just as the baseline with like what is play and why it's important. Um, but yeah, hopefully we can move on to other areas that you'll be interested in and explore and discuss. But yeah, please give us feedback on how you felt this has gone, what else you would like, anything at all. Be nice. So say
Yeah.
what you like. I mean, you can challenge us as much as anything. It's about having some kind of thinking and yeah, possibly other ways forward we can take these kind of sessions.
And by all means, if there aren't any other questions, then we're not going to make you sit online. You're more than welcome to go. We will be here for a few more minutes, so but please do
Yeah,
enjoy
particularly
the
if
rest
you've
of
been
your
working all
evening.
day, yeah, then please go and put your feet up now. But thank you so much for attending. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a joy to chat away about play. And yeah, thanks, Helen. And
Thank you, Karen.
thank you, Sean, for timekeeping for us. And yeah, hopefully this is the start of Yeah, some good meetups and some good chats.